The Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels kicked off 1997 in a big way, following arguably his most successful year of his entire professional wrestling career in 1996. After dropping the title at Survivor Series to the supposed next big thing, the next guy in the World Wrestling Federation in Psycho Sid Vicious, he would recapture the gold shortly after at one of the Big Four events at Royal Rumble on January 19th. Even though HBK would start the year out on top, questions of uncertainty and clouds of dread loomed large overhead from this point going forward. Michaels would go on to vacate the WWF Championship and even contemplate retirement following the development of a knee injury. This would make Shawn Michaels quote-unquote lose his smile and kick off a slow-burning heel turn throughout the rest of 1997. Michaels vowed to come back into the squared circle and find his smile through the first thing he ever loved, which was professional wrestling. Much of Michaels' in-ring career was put on hold throughout the rest of 97, but he would return from injury and briefly team up with the man who he would take on at WrestleMania 14 in 1998 for the WWF Championship in Stone Cold Steve Austin. Much like The Undertaker teaming up with Big Show to form the Unholy Alliance in 1999, this was done to take some of the workload off the workhorse in the Heartbreak Kid. And with Michaels losing his smile, the fans of the World Wrestling Federation and people around the world would continue to lose their smile as well. Even though they didn't know that they were on the cusp of one of the most historic feuds in the history of the World Wrestling Federation. That being in the Hitman Bret Hart, or Bret the Hitman Hart, and the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. They would take their feud to a much more personal level, both inside and outside of the ring. Hart would kick off this so-called Domino Effect by claiming that Michaels was faking his injury. But HBK would then fire back with his infamous Sunny Days line during a promo on Monday Night Raw, referring to a potential affair between Hart and the WWF diva in Tammy Sunny Sitch. This all whilst Bret Hart was still married. In August, Michaels was the special guest referee for the WWF title main event at SummerSlam between Bret the Hitman Hart and the Lord of Darkness in The Undertaker. Following Hart spitting in the face of his rival in Shawn Michaels, foreshadowing things that would happen later in the year, Michaels would aim a chair shot at the head of Bret the Hitman Hart. However, the misfire would cost The Undertaker the chance to win the World Wrestling Federation Championship after he took out the Demon of Death Valley and allowed for the champion in Bret Hart to crawl into the cover, and much to the dismay of Michaels, he had no choice but to count the three. Alongside the development of the feud between the Heartbreak Kid and the Hitman, on September 20th, Shawn Michaels would defeat the then European champion in the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith to claim the gold amongst a pro-British Bulldog crowd at One Night Only 1997 in Birmingham, England. This would seem to catapult or cement a heel turn for the Heartbreak Kid, as Michaels was showered with booze and even had garbage thrown in his direction as he would walk out of One Night Only as the first ever Grand Slam champion in the history of the World Wrestling Federation. But what he had in his future was much, much darker than anything he could have expected. The gravest challenge of HBK's career would come next, and coincidentally would produce one of his greatest matches thus far and in the history of Michaels' career at October's In Your House Bad Blood, where he took on The Undertaker in the first ever Hell in a Cell match in WWF history, or WWE history. Michaels would somehow be able to eke out a victory after the debut of Taker's long-lost brother in Kane, as he crashed through the cell and delivered a signature tombstone pile driver rendering the dead man defenseless and allowing for HBK to crawl into the cover and claim the victory. Following the historic first ever Hell in a Cell, Michaels, along with Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Chyna, would form the iconic D-Generation X. During this formation, however, a rival of HBK and Bret Hart would simultaneously launch the pro-Canadian heel faction known as the Hart Foundation. This would lead us into the historic Survivor Series 1997, November's Survivor Series Gang Rules. And whether you're a casual or a hardcore professional wrestling fan, you know this as being the birthplace of one of the most controversial and historic wrestling angles in history. That being the Montreal Screwjob. The last-ditch effort of Vincent Kennedy McMahon to wrestle the World Championship away from its top star before they jumped ship over to the rival company in World Championship Wrestling. By adding insult to injury and stamping the finish in both distaste and disrespect, Hart would be locked in his own finishing move by the Heartbreak Kid, and Vince McMahon would thus call for the bell without an actual submission being physical or verbal from the champion in Hart. November 9th, 1997 would become a day etched in history for all the wrong reasons, and it would be punctuated with a wad of spit from the former champion towards the chairman and the boss in Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And even though the Heartbreak Kid ended the year with 2 titles, them being the European and World Wrestling Federation Championship, a 3rd title could be given to the year 1997 for HBK as well. And I'm sure it wouldn't be without controversy, a Hitman or heartbreak throughout it.